Hey up, right, a couple of weeks ago I made a video about surviving motorcycling long term, and one thing that I mentioned in that video was pre-ride checks, or safety checks as I like to think of them as. Now, quite a few people came back on that, generally a good feedback, but obviously there were a lot of newcomers to motorcycle riding that weren't really aware that you should be doing these checks, so I thought I would make this video mainly for them. Now, in the handbook of any new bike that you buy, it will have a section on pre-ride checks, and I think pre-ride checks is maybe a bit of a misconception. I don't think you necessarily need to be doing these checks before every single ride, but you should certainly be doing them on a weekly basis. And you know, the whole sort of emphasis behind the importance of doing these checks is that you're keeping your motorcycle in good running order and you're keeping it in a safe condition. Because it's not just about you know, maintaining your bike in good running order, it's about keeping your bike safe. And if your bike isn't safe when you're riding it, you're potentially not safe either. Now, depending on where you live, you may be storing your bike during the winter months because obviously the weather's not fit for riding. So there are a couple of other things to look out for. You know, this is definitely time to be doing a thorough pre-ride check, because you know, things can go wrong to a bike while it's not being used in, you know, cold, damp winter months. The first thing I always do is just check clutch operation. Now, it's not so bad on the Honda GB350 because it's got a rubber boot over the closure, which all bikes used to have these back in the day, but most of them don't nowadays, and that means that water and moisture from riding in the rain or simply washing your bike can get into here and run down your cable. Now, cables these days are a lot better than they used to be. They usually have a sort of coating on them to protect them from moisture, but worst case scenario, those cables can form rust, and you will usually be able to detect it by a slightly rough feeling when you pull the cable in. If it's nice and smooth, all is good. The other thing that can happen, especially if the bike's a few years old and there has been rust accumulating on the actual cable itself, is that some of the strands of that cable can snap, you know, because of the corrosion that they've accumulated, and that could produce a sort of a notchy feeling where you feel a bit of resistance and then it releases. So watch out for that. If it's a nice smooth action, everything's fine and you can move on to the next thing. Throttle cables, you can get the same problems as I described with the brake cable earlier on, although it's less likely with your throttle, to be honest. First of all, make sure that you've got a good throttle return action, so pull it back, let go of it, and it should easily spring back into place. If it doesn't, if it sticks, obviously that's dangerous because it's going to make your throttle stick open. You know, I mean, how much of a problem that really is, I don't know, because I have had bikes in the past that you know, you had to physically push them back. Not ideal though. So again, it could be down to rust or perhaps needing lubrication in your actual cables, or it could be something like you know, a bar end mirror fouling on the end of the hand grip that's stopping it from returning properly. So yeah, just make sure that you've got a good throttle action and it returns back safely. Now, the next thing I like to check is the braking system, starting with the brake fluid. Brake fluid doesn't last forever. What's the word? I think it's aqueous. It does absorb moisture, and getting moisture into the system can make your brakes less effective. This could manifest itself by them being slightly spongy, or worst case scenario, barely working at all. So you need to check the sight glass and make sure that first of all you do have some brake fluid in there. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's high or low, as long as there's some in the reservoir here. But the other thing you need to be checking for is cloudiness. If it looks a little bit cloudy or milky, and you can't see through it, I mean, at the end of the day it should be perfectly clear, but if there's any evidence of cloudiness, that's a sign that it has absorbed moisture and that your brake fluid will need changing. So you're checking your brake fluid level and you're checking the condition of your brake fluid itself. It should be nice and clear with a slightly gold tinge to it. It shouldn't be cloudy or milky. I mean, I've actually seen them neglected to the point where the brake fluid itself had turned into a sort of a gel, and they've definitely gone too far when it gets to that stage. So check it on your handlebar for your front brake, and then check the level and the condition of the fluid in your rear brake reservoir. Again, you check, it's a little bit more difficult with these, but you're checking to make sure that it's nice and clear, that you have sufficient in and it's not below the maximum mark, and that it is still liquid and hasn't turned into a jelly. Everything's fine. Obviously this Honda's less than a year old, so I don't expect there to be any problems. But you know, one thing that you should look out for, if there's a rapid drop in the level, it could indicate that there's a leak somewhere in your braking system, and that goes for the front and rear brakes. Obviously it is going to drop over time as your pads wear and they become thinner. It's going to require, to take up the sort of distance with the brake pads, it's going to require some more fluid being sort of put into the system in order to push the brakes out sufficiently to activate the brake. So it's okay if over like 2 or 3 years it drops a little bit, but if you witness a sudden drop, it's an indication that there may be a leak somewhere in your system that will need looking at. Now, when you've done that, it can be quite difficult, but you can check the condition of your pads just by looking down here. Again, you know, on a newish bike, it's not going to be an issue, but you're just checking the thickness, the meat of the actual brake pad material to make sure there's plenty there. I think usually in your handbook it does tell you to what to look out for, but that's just something worth bearing in mind. Once I've done that, what I like to do is, I'll just take my phone out of my pocket. Jump on the bike and just manually check the brakes. So just rock it backwards and forwards, make sure that you're getting a good braking action, doesn't feel spongy or unusual in any way when you pull the brake. Same with the rear brake, it's a little bit more difficult. Just to make sure that you're getting a good braking action and that everything is as it should be. I mean, over time brakes do deteriorate as more and more moisture is sucked in by the brake fluid. That's why generally you're advised to change the brake fluid every couple of years, sometimes 3 years. It depends what grade they've put in there. But that's your main part of your braking system checked out. The next thing we need to do is check the lights. Now, to do this, you'll need to turn your ignition system on to open the circuit. There we go. What I like to start off with is just check the operation of the braking lights. So with the handbrake there, I'm just gently squeezing the handbrake to make sure that we've got good activation of the braking light. Same with the rear brake. Just making sure it all works properly. You shouldn't need excessive force to activate these. Sometimes if it does require excessive force, just a little bit of maintenance fluid on the actual switch itself, the brake light switch, will free it up enough. Sometimes I've noticed manufacturers will use quite a thick grease, and in the colder months when the bike's been laid up for a while, sometimes that grease can sort of set and sort of stick and stop it from activating properly, but everything's working fine. We've got the rear lights functioning properly, so now it's time to just check the indicators. So we're going to check the rear indicators. I'll show you the front indicators in a moment. They're all functioning exactly as they should do. We've also got the hazard warning lights, so I can see that's working correctly. What I'm going to do now is just turn the bike round so we can have a look at the front lights. Right, obviously you don't need to turn the bike round when you're doing this. I'm having to do it so that, you know, it's available to the camera there. So yeah, front hazards are working correctly. The lights do stay on all the time on these, so it's becoming more common with bikes nowadays. So left indicator, right indicator, both functioning correctly. Let's have a look at the lights. Now we've got daytime running lights on this bike, like most bikes nowadays, so they're on all the time. And what we need to do, familiarise myself with the switch on these. I think it's out for main beam. So, yep, main beam's working correctly. And the pass light's working correctly. So we know that the full braking system now is as it should be, and all the lighting and indicators are working correctly. And the other thing that I forgot to mention is your horn. Obviously it's a legal requirement in this country, probably in most countries. Just make sure that it works properly. Sometimes because the electrics are exposed to the weather, you can get a bit of corrosion on the actual contacts themselves, which sometimes you need to just unfasten them and clean them up, and then it'll work fine. I've never known it be anything else except them, obviously. Next up, tyres. Right, tyres. These are one of the most important components on the bike. This is what connects you and the bike to the road, so your tyres need to be in top condition. First thing you need to do is just check the tread depth. Now, here in the UK, I'm not sure what it's like in the rest of the world, but you need to have a minimum of 2 millimeters tread depth. I mean, looking at these, I would say they're probably about 5, maybe even 6 millimeters, so I'm not going to physically check them. You can buy little tools for just a couple of pounds, tread depth gauges on places like Amazon. I'll see if I can find one and I'll stick it in the link below so that you know what you're looking for. What you will tend to find with bikes as the mileage runs up on them is you will get wear mainly in the middle of the tyre, so that is always where you should check your tread depth, not on the sides where they don't get any wear. 99% of the miles you do are in a straight line, so all the actual wear is going to be on the central band of the tyre here, so that's the dead centre of the tyre is where you need to be checking your tread depth. If it goes beyond 2 millimeters, A, here in the UK your tyres are illegal, and B, if you get caught in rain, there's a possibility that you won't have the required grip on the road for braking and cornering. So it is a very, very serious safety aspect of a motorcycle. It is something that you need to keep an eye on. Now, the other thing is check for foreign objects. So, what I normally do is I roll the bike along. It's easier with a back tyre if you've got a centre stand, but with the front, you're probably going to have to roll the bike along and check each bit of the tyre to make sure there are no nails or screws or anything like that stuck in the tyre that might be causing a slow puncture. Next up, check your tyre pressures. Now, tyre pressures are going to vary according to what the ambient temperatures are. I would hazard a guess that if I check the tyre pressures on this now, because it's only about 6 degrees at the moment, the tyre pressures are probably going to be low. Usually on the swing arm of every motorcycle there is a little sticker that tells you what your tyre pressures should be. You should have a pump of some sort. Mine's got a gauge built into it, so I can get a fairly good idea of what the tyre pressures are, and make sure that you maintain your tyre pressures as to what that little panel says on the side of your swing arm. If you don't, if your tyre pressures are too high, there is a possibility that you will lose grip and handling. If they're too low, they will wear out excessively quick, so it is important to keep them at the right tyre pressure. And don't forget, the tyre pressure for the pillion and solo riding are different. So if you're riding with a pillion, make sure that you set it up so that the tyre pressures are suitable for carrying the pillion. If you're riding solo, make sure they're set up for solo. I know people like to pull this apart and say, well, I'm a heavy guy or I'm a light guy or whatever. Don't overthink it. Just stick to what it says on the bike sticker panel and what it says in the manual, and just stick to what it tells you. Now, the other thing is just check the side walls, especially if it's an old bike and it spends several months a year sort of laid up in the garage during the winter. They have some lubricant's built into the rubber on tyres, but that lubricant only works when the bike is actually in use. So if it does spend long amounts of time not being used, those lubricants will migrate away from where they need to be, and there is a possibility of perishing and cracks appearing in the side walls of your tyres. Now, a little bit isn't a problem, but if it gets bad, it is potentially an MOT failure. Bear that in mind, because the tyre technically isn't safe. So just bear that in mind. It's not so much a problem with a new bike, but if your bike's 4 or 5 years old, start to keep an eye on your side walls. Make sure that there's no evidence of cracking, especially if your bike doesn't have a centre stand, because there tends to be a lot more weight on the tyres when the bike is laid up. And if you're losing a little bit of pressure, for example, you know, if you're going from summer where the tyre pressures are going to be higher and then it drops because the temperatures have dropped, there is more of a likelihood of cracking in your sidewalls. And as I said, don't forget, tyre pressure is dependent on the ambient temperatures. So when the weather's cold, the temperature will drop and they'll need to be reinflated. In the summer, you might need to drop the tyre pressures because, you know, the weather's warmer and those higher temperatures tend to increase tyre pressure. So tyre pressure is something really you need definitely to be checking on a weekly basis. Now, the rear suspension, check for corrosion. You will often get a bit of corrosion on the trim or on the springs, whatever. That's not necessarily an issue. What can be an issue is if you've got corrosion on your damping rod, which is causing you know, your fluid or oil in your shock absorber to leak out as each time it passes that sort of blemish in the chrome on the damping rod. If you spray like I do, something like a maintenance fluid over these components to protect them, just make sure you don't get fooled by excess maintenance fluid, because I have done that before. I thought I've got a leak and it turned out it was just maintenance fluid that had gathered at the bottom of the damping rod. So just check your suspension, make sure that there's no sign of any of the fluid leaking out. Let's move to the front one. And you're looking for the same on the stanchions. So if you've got a boot on it like this one, just pull it up so you can have a look. Make sure there's no fluid on the bottom of the stanchion. Obviously, if you don't have boots on your front forks, it's a lot easier to check, but you're more likely to get stone chips, etc. in your fork stanchion, which will cause fluid leakage. So just check that everything is nice and smooth on your stanchions. There's no rust or blemishes that are causing fluid to leak from your suspension as the bike is in operation. Once you've done that, just check the operation of your suspension, and what you're really looking for is any grating or notchiness in your suspension action. So engage your front brake, rock the bike backwards and forwards, just make sure you've got a nice smooth fluid suspension action and you've not got any notchiness or grating. It's a little bit harder on the back, but do the same on the back. Keep your brake engaged so the bike doesn't move around, and just sort of, you should, if there's anything really bad going on, you should be able to feel it or detect it. You know, just any roughness in the suspension action, you can usually tell. I mean, to be honest, with these components, it's very rare that anything goes wrong with them, but you do need to keep an eye on them. Right, final thing, your drive chain. Another really important part of the bike. I mean, it's not just about keeping the bike running safely. Chains are potentially lethal. I'm just going to check that we're... Yeah, chains are potentially lethal if they're not adjusted properly or if they've corroded. I remember going to an accident in the mid-1990s where a chain had come off, it had then snapped. It had come off because the guy hadn't kept it, he was a young lad actually, he'd not kept the chain adjusted properly, so it jumped off the sprocket, but then it had snapped and the chain whipped round and cut into the Achilles tendon on the back of his ankle, almost severed it. That was quite serious. So, you know, chains are dangerous things at speed. You need to make sure that they're kept in good working order. First of all, just check it both ways for smoothness of action. That'll give you any indication that you've got stiff links that are potentially a weak spot in the future. And again, you should be able to feel a sort of a resistance or dragging if something's seized somewhere. And now O-ring chains nowadays, they are internally lubricated with a grease for life, but again, on an older chain, an older bike, there is the potential for the O-rings to perish and it lose some of that grease, and that's when you're going to get problems with seizures. So just run it both ways. I mean, you can go along it with your finger and just check for stiff links as you're doing that if you want to. In fact, it's probably a good idea. Check that it's well lubricated and that there's no obvious rust. I mean, you know, if you're driving a lot in wet weather, a standard chain like this is going to pick up a little bit of surface rust on the outside and inside plates, but as long as it's not too bad, it isn't a problem. That's fairly normal. Just try to keep them lubricated and protected as much as you can. Also check your chain tension, make sure it's not too tight. It's rarely too tight, but obviously chains stretch over time and loosen off, and that's when you have the potential issue with the chain jumping off under certain circumstances. So yeah, check your chain, make sure everything is in accordance with the parameters set in your owner's manual, and you know, get into the habit of checking your chain regularly, because as I say, I've seen what chains can do and it can be quite nasty. Right, final thing, and this is just about the you know, looking after your bike, your oil level. If your bike's been laid up for weeks or months in your garage, always check where the bike's been to make sure there's no oil been dropped on the floor while it's been in storage. Bikes are a lot better than they used to be. I've not found that to be an issue for decades now, but it used to be a problem back in the day. But bikes can burn oil as well, so it is worth at least once a week just checking your oil level. I mean, this is a dipstick type. Some, like on the Royal Enfields, are sight glass in the side. They're much easier. Make sure you've got the bike level on a level surface, in that it's not leaning one way or the other, because that can give you a false reading. And really, you should start the bike up and get the engine warm before you check it. Now, the way on the Honda to do this, before anybody starts telling me that I'm getting it all wrong, this was from the mechanic that serviced it, is just push it down so that it's seated. Don't screw it in. Just push it down so that the thread is seated at the top of the thread, then pull it out and check it. And we've just got it on the minimum there. This bike hasn't been run up. I've not warmed it up, so I know that's where I normally expect it to be. It's just touching the bottom of the dipstick on the minimum mark. So just check that you've got enough oil in there. Always have a spare 1 litre can of oil in your garage or your shed or whatever, so that you can top it up if need be. But as I say, make sure that you warm the engine up to normal operating temperatures. On the Honda, that will mean actually taking it out for a run, because you can't get it up to normal operating temperatures on idle. It's got to be running, just to make sure that you've got enough oil in there and you're good to go for your next journey. Owner's handbooks might list this in a different order. They might also require you to do some other things, but that's the basics that you should be looking to check your bike. They call them pre-ride checks. I sort of call them safety checks, and to my mind, you should be doing this weekly. I don't think there's really a need to do it after or before every single ride. The thing is, you know, with tyres and that, yeah, they can pick up nails and such like. When you're riding the bike, you can feel that the brakes are okay. You'll know that the chain's okay and that the engine's running perfectly, etc. It's when you detect problems that you start checking them out. So Really, you don't need to be doing all of these checks every single time you add, or even every week. I would say you need to be checking your tyres fairly regularly. Your chain, you know, if it's in adjustment, it's potentially thousands of miles before it comes out of adjustment. You'll know that your brakes are working okay because you're riding the bike. You'll know that your cables are okay because you can feel it, you're riding the bike. Certainly you should be doing these in spring when you take your bike out of storage, if you store it during the winter. But you know, things like your tyres, I think, do need to be checked, you know, once a week, maybe even twice a week, just to make sure you haven't picked anything up while you've been out and about. Brakes, etc., you know, they don't wear that quickly, so you know, again, I think weekly is enough, but you must do them, because if your bike isn't in safe running order, you're not safe when you're riding it. And as I say, I'm just making this video really for those that are fairly new to the pastime of motorcycling, that might not be aware of these things. They might not read the handbook. You know, they're just things to bear in mind, that you should keep an eye on these components. Familiarise yourself with the owner's handbook to know exactly what you're looking for and what you should be checking. On water-cooled bikes, obviously, there's the cooling system that you're going to need to check as well. There will be a description on how to go about that in the handbook. For your chain, I've not got into any specifics about tyre pressures and chain measurements, etc., because they're going to be different from bike to bike, but the instructions are always there in your handbook for you to know what to do. And if in doubt, you know, everybody's got friends, or I'm sure you could ring your dealership up and they'll give you some guidance if you're not quite sure what you're doing. Right, once again, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this and my other videos, and in doing so helping to support this channel. I really do appreciate it. I'd also appreciate it if you would leave a like, hype this video if the hype button is available to you, and subscribe to the channel if you're not already a subscriber. 80% of the people that watch my videos are not subscribed. You know, I'd really appreciate it if you just hit that subscription button. It doesn't cost you a penny, and you can unsubscribe at any time you like. Now, there are other ways that you can help me out via my Patreon page or PayPal donations. The details of that are in the video description down below. Or you could use the super thanks button, which is just down here, and make a donation. It's not essential, I just see it as a sort of a tipping jar. So if you appreciate the content that I'm putting out, you can show your appreciation. You don't have to if you don't want to, but I do appreciate it. I am of course going to be back on Friday, so until then, please ride safely, and I'll see you soon.